Hi, good evening. Thank you for joining me for this persuasive speech that I'm about to deliver. We're going to go ahead and go right into it, okay? So the majority of workers in this country work very hard for the country. A lot of low wage, minimum wage workers truly are the backbone of this country, providing us goods and services daily, hourly. Um, but we need to make sure that those workers are being properly compensated. And speaking from personal experience, I come from a household where most of our family members at one point had worked minimum wage jobs. I mean, at one point, I had a parent who was working two minimum wage jobs just so that we made sure we could string together payments, make sure that we had what we needed. And even from a child's perspective, like we can note how incredibly stressful that is and that can be. And that shouldn't be how it is. We should not have this high amount of economic stress for our workers and especially our hardest workers. Um, so, having said that, we need to address that the minimum wage in this country has not changed or been raised since 2009, where it sits at a federal level at $7.25. Now, there are states that go above, there are states that go below, but federally it's $7.25, which is an incredibly low number for our year, for our times, and for the rate of inflation. According to the AFL-CIO labor union, the rate of inflation at the current rate of inflation, the minimum wage should be closer to $24 an hour, which is not going to happen. But we have to know that it's almost 3 times lower currently. So it's time for the minimum wage to make some movement after 13 years. It's time for the minimum wage in the United States to be increased to, at the bare minimum, $15 an hour federally. That needs to be the baseline for our hard workers, our backbone. For the continuation of the speech, first, I'll explain how far behind the current minimum wage is. We did touch on that earlier. Secondly, I will explain why there's a need to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour. And lastly, we will explain why it's a benefit to not just those workers, but to all workers in general, to raise that minimum wage floor to an acceptable, more respectable level of $15 per hour. First, let's explore how truly far behind the wage scale is in this country. So the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 since 2009. This is one of the, according to the Congressional Budget Office, this is one of the longest stretches of stagnation for federal minimum wage. Coming up to 13 years, previously had been 10 years. And that's according to Holly Sklar, which is raising minimum wage in hard times, referencing that previously had been at least 10 years as the second longest time. Despite the world around us becoming more and more expensive, wages have not seen a similar increase. Again, according to the AFL-CIO labor union, at the very peak in 1968, our wage power was at its very highest. Since that peak in 1968, the power of our wages, the power of wages for minimum wage workers, has dropped at least about 30%. The exact number 28.6. That's almost a third in drop in spending power from at its peak to what it is now, which is a very drastic decline. This shows that minimum wage earners do not have the same spending power, do not have the same financial flexibility and it's gotten progressively worse up into our day to day. Now we're going to look at just how poorly minimum wage workers are being compensated. Let's take a look at why it needs to be at least $15 per hour. So raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would affect a drastic number of individuals and families who are reliant on these wages. Just to start, if I can give some information on exactly how many. Again, these numbers are according to the Congressional Budget Office. Raising the minimum wage would affect 27.3 million workers and 1.3 million families. So that's people that no longer have to fear or continuously on the treadmill of poverty, living these incredibly financially stressful situations day in and day out. And 1.3 million families is incredibly significant as well. Families with opportunities to grow and opportunities to invest in themselves and their families, and to live stress-free lives. So that's very significant as well. And that's with the number being at 15. Again, we discussed the proper number being $24 per hour, but again, just asking for 15 would move and change the lives for that many amount of people. It's very significant. There's also a significant amount of support to raise the $15 among adults in the US. So your average voter, your average adult voter in the United States favors increasing to $15 per hour by about a 2/3 margin. So not only would it be incredibly helpful for struggling individuals and families, it's also a very supported and very popular policy and position amongst adult Americans. Lastly, now that we understand how far behind the minimum wage is and how many people it could potentially impact, we'll discuss why it's relevant for all workers in the United States. Again, referencing the article by Holly Sklar, the Raising Minimum Wage in Hard Times, raising the minimum wage strengthens workers throughout the country. Again, you increase the percentage of spending power, you increase the wage floor. Now you have these low-income workers with the flexibility to spend more, thus stimulating a struggling economy. There's been, and according to the article or the state-by-state list by HRIS and Payroll Excellence, they note that prior to big economic downturns, different depressions, they're usually preceded by very low wage power and a non-existent minimum wage. So to avoid these economic downturns, we need to make sure that a majority of Americans have enough spending power and under our current structure, that spending power is put back into our economy for at least a strengthening economy. So it's to the benefit of everybody. If everybody is able to make more, spend more, feel a little bit better about working, and just in general stimulating our job opportunities and our economic opportunities as well. So in review, we discussed how far behind the federal minimum wage is, and how stagnant it's been for over a decade. Federally, again, certain states have, according to the Congressional Budget Office, certain states have been able to raise their minimum wage, not all the way to 15, which is the goal, but federally it's still stagnant. Secondly, we discussed how many people it would affect to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. We discussed millions of individuals and millions of families. And then lastly, we explained how the increase in minimum wage would increase the percentage of spending power, which would increase and strengthen our economy as a whole. So again, the minimum wage, as of right now, needs to be raised to 15 federally. It's a benefit to each state, it's a benefit across the country. And there's millions of workers and families that rely on minimum wage work, whether it be one job, two job, or transitioning between jobs. And we need to make sure that we, as a country, are able to provide respectable, well-earning jobs for the hardest working and the most affected by these downturns. So again, thank you for your time. And yeah, have a great night.